Let's be as honest as possible, and this story will tell you just that, what we'll be having a conversation on here on Kickstarter this morning. Let's take a look.
This may look like an ordinary snake, but the circumstances under which it got onto this man's neck is certainly extraordinary, at least going by the counts of the locals. The man is suspected to have stolen household items from a man called Stephen Kasozi, who in turn sought the services of a witch doctor to track down the culprit. Scores of people flocked Kasozi's home to witness the bizarre incident. These household items are some of the property that's said to have been stolen. Kasozi says he lost his items 3 days ago.
Binagenzeeyo nampa obuddaga nembuleeta nange agenda bwemaaso masobeti ne bwoti ojja kulanga akoze eki ng'omusajja ojja kuca ku macyange ebintu abirese ku makyala.
The residents say cases of crime have increased in recent times, especially theft and burglary.
Abantu obubbi bayitiriddeko ababbi ng'ababbi bannaye tukuuma ababbi ate tukutte ku babbi naye tebaggwaayo.
I am telling all the youth to work hard so that they can improve.
The police arrived later on, but could do little before the witch doctor was summoned to free the suspect. The police discouraged the locals from using witchcraft to curb crime.
But the people, when they think they would have stolen their property, they should come to police and make a report. If the thief is there, we arrest the money will be prosecuted to court.
We followed the witch doctor to Bloba in Wachiso, where special rituals were performed before the snake got off the man. He later gave his account of events.
Nibangamba nagenza okulaba nga omusota guzze nga guzze ne gunnezinga mu bulago.
Bagala mukalako emikolo wanadda mu mbeera ng'omuntu abamuvunaana omusanga bazze okuba bano ensonga ze ffe b'ekisawo bikoma wano tujjamu kwasaba obuyinza.
Currently there is a traditional ceremony being performed for this man here, probably to come back to his senses, and according to the traditional healer said this is the only thing that can help him. Solomon Kawesa, NTV.
So, you know, as journalists, we see this like almost every single day when you go to cover out stories, but there's certain things that we have to filter. We can't just show you every single thing. So you who is on the ground, you who is in our communities, I'm sure you've seen this time and again. Your views are honored and precious to us. The hashtag is morning at NTV. Let us in on your beat, on your side of this particular story and why these trends are actually becoming common. And so to have that conversation is Mr. Simon Senyonga. He is a Christian lawyer and also not a new face here on the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, madam.
You're welcome. Next to him we have Mr. Brian Kagezi. He is a born-again preacher at Numa Church. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Mr. Senyonga, I'll start with you. I mean, these faces are now becoming so common and it's becoming worrying. What's your view on this, and what could we attribute this to?
First of all, let me just refer to a book written by my spiritual father, Prophet Elvis Mbonyi, Just the Powers of the Age to Come, where he says that for as long as Christianity denies its transcendence, then the world will have to opt for what you call like the new age or the apostasy. For the sake of transcendence. Now, what happens is this: the center of the world revolves around the church and the Christians. For as long as the Christians deny the transcendence that they have, they're not able to cap that, because first of all, Christianity ought to be the permanent solution to any challenge that you have. Number two,
that is whether you're a Christian.
That's whether you're a Christian or not. Yes.
We have other faiths and religions
exactly.
as well.
Now we can now discuss the second option of the failure in the systems, because you realize that now the locals, for example, in that story, do not rely or do not trust the nature of the systems, the investigation. I can tell you as a lawyer, the process of investigation, prosecution, opening of a file, until you go to the logical conclusion of the case is quite tedious. And the whole process is rigorous, yet involved a lot of corruption. So I would understand when the locals do not rely on the failed police system and rather opt for a witch doctor who will offer much more efficient services to sort that issue. Now, where does the church have to come in all these things? The church ought to create the firm moral fabric and a strong system that can deal with such crime.
Okay. All right. Let me jump over to Mr. Brian, of course. He has said that the church has a huge role to play with regards to mitigating such and offering solutions to the challenges people face on a day-to-day basis. So do we say that the church has failed in that regard?
We cannot say the church has failed. I think we're getting back to the same narrative a while ago we were talking about with some people, where the government of Uganda is seeking to regulate churches, especially around, and when I looked at this, especially are fighting the prophetic churches. As myself being a prophet, when I look at that, I just laugh, because that's what we do. There's a time I was in Masaka in a crusade, and a guy came, had lost a car. I told him where the car was, where it was parked, the number plate, and where to get it, and they got it. But you see, because
how did you know?
Because I'm prophetic and I'm a Christian, and it's a gift. Prophecy is a gift. You cannot prophesy unless God gives you the gift to see. So what we do is, when people come to our churches, they have criticized us for calling names and telling people details, but this is what we're trying to solve. That if someone stole your thing, you can direct them to the house. But the problem we're having today with Christianity is that those who are powerless, that don't have the power of God, have stood up and started fighting those that have the real power of God. So this is what it has done. It has robbed society of the power of God. Even when you read the Bible, you find that in the old church, the apostles were powerful. There's a story of Peter and a sorcerer called Simon, who was doing a lot of witchcraft and had called himself something until the apostles showed up, and the man repented and wanted now to buy their gift. So it means today we are losing that power in church, and because the ones who are fighting it also are coming from church, although on the side where they don't have the power, people are going to the place where they have solution. So I don't blame the locals to go to witch doctors to do that, but it is sad, and it's awakening for some of the clergymen.
Mr. Senyonga, let's look at what exactly could be the catalyst with regards to, this trend becoming so common every single place. It's not just a Ugandan problem. I mean, it's an African problem, and not just in Africa, I mean the globe, so to speak. So is it right to say this, and of course this views coming from the public domain, that maybe the church could be the catalyst, of this growing trend of people relying more on witchcraft? Reason being, they say that nowadays a majority of the churches preach nothing but prosperity gospel. So they don't tell the congregants the reality. They don't call them out when they go wrong. So people go with this notion, and they carry out their lives in this notion that maybe, when I have problems, maybe the church will not help me because they promote tomorrow I'll get a job, my family will be blessed, and stuff like that. But that's not the reality. So could we say that the church is the catalyst with regards to them promoting more of prosperity gospel?
Yes, I think I will agree with what Prophet Brian says. Now, first of all, for as long as you see the church is equipped with the ability to be able to solve such issues, and that comes through the embodiment of the prophetic ministry, because first of all, that will give you insight and foresight and permanent solutions to any challenge. Now, when a local goes to a witch doctor, it's because they want to see the future. They want to know the person who was blaming the colleague for stealing the television. He has to go to a witch doctor to get a solution, which the church cannot offer. I can tell you this. If you went to some of these religious churches, they just can't give you these solutions. Number two is the prosperity gospel. The challenge emphatically no. The gospel of Jesus ultimately is the gospel of prosperity. Now, when actually you persecute the gospel of prosperity, you want us to preach the gospel of poverty, because that is logical and reasonable and understandable. And you see, you want us to, you want the society society to shape the narrative of the church, and the church to become a political institution which is responsive and reactionary to the challenges of society.
How do you explain this, that a majority of churches now are moving away from calling out their congregants whenever they go wrong? How do you explain that?
I explain that just by one simple answer. Religion. Religion is the biggest problem. For as long as you have a religious mindset that presents God as a dead God, not as a living God, because everybody is looking for something. Any man, whether they be rich or poor, there is one thing they can trade their lives for, knowing the future. That's not everything that everybody can give you. That's only that the church can give you. Now, for as long as you can go to a witch and you can get this solution and the church can't give it to you, you rather opt for that.
So what you're saying is that the church ought to give the same solutions that a witch doctor ideally would give.
Because what you're talking about, that the church is the catalyst to this, I don't believe that's true. But this is the understanding. The church, when you say the church is preaching the prosperity gospel and the prosperity gospel is pushing people into witchcraft, that's not true. Look at this man who did this. He stole because he doesn't have. And church predominantly preaches for someone to become better. If you are better, you can't steal. He's stealing because he doesn't have. If he was pastored by men who understand the word of God, it means his life would have improved. He would have known how to handle himself.
But do you agree the pastors who actually preach the prosperity gospel without going deeper to the house, most of them tell you, you know what, tomorrow you'll get a job, tomorrow you'll do this, but they don't get to the details of, my friend, you have to work hard, my friend, there are early mornings and late nights. Very few do that.
Let me help on that. You see, you cannot worry about the doctor you found in the hospital because you don't manage the regulations of how they become or qualify to be a doctor. When you find a minister standing on the pulpit to preach, you must, especially if he commands a certain number of congregation, you must understand, like you said, late nights and early mornings. Someone doesn't just arrive there. People don't just listen. People are not fools. There's a process. So the process is by God. It's God who establishes, and man cannot fathom that. If you sit down here and say you're going to understand how someone should be deep with the word of God, you may not understand, because the one who qualifies is God. And by the time a man stands to start speaking, it's God who has qualified him, and what they're preaching is the truth from God. The problem we're having is that society is too worried about the qualification of the man of God, other than worrying for what they should be listening to. The men who come to preach, I'll tell you this, the men who come to preach, us preachers, we were bright by any standards. We could take on any job and flourish at it. But God called us. He told us to leave that and come and serve him. Okay. You understand?
Right.
So that means the people you see on the pulpit preaching are not dummies as you may think. They're actually bright men. They understand. And so when they have studied the word of God, they've gone deep to understand the word of God. And what they are teaching is the mind of God.
All right. And of course, we'll get into that and also touch on the beat of the law with regards to witchcraft, the practice of witchcraft in the country. Let's take a look at what our president had to say with regards to the same. Let's this. On this particular development, on the trend. This is a comment that of course came in last year, but he was very articulate with regards to the same. Mr. Senyonga, we had also some leaders in Elango who are actually calling for the amendment of the Witchcraft Act, saying that it's not pinching hard enough, and that's why the trend is actually becoming a worrying thing. Is it a matter of the law not being strong enough, or a matter of social norms?
There is a competition between the two. Now, ideally, the perfect structuring of a law is a law which can go ahead of society and shape it. But what happens right now is not that the solution is not just an amendment of the law. Number one, enforcement of that law. You'll find very few cases where that has been practiced. One of the cases which has been outstanding is a constitutional petition, a case called Salvatore Abuki versus the Attorney General, where a man was banished from the village for practicing witchcraft. Now, that act was declared unconstitutional. Actually, the punishment that came with that act was declared unconstitutional. Now, is it an issue of the law? No, it isn't. It is an issue of the enforcement. Number two, witchcraft takes different forms and aspects. Now, the law itself does not provide for that. There are new things. concerning witchcraft. And now what has the government thought in its wisdom? It has thought that one of the forms of witchcraft is coming through the churches. Yes, there are some cults. So what do they have to do? They go by creating a religious policy that will curb. Now this religious policy is actually a generalization of the situation. All right, they're actually much more, and actually they're targeting born-again churches, but emphatically prophetic ministries. Now, the challenge of that is this: it is only one-sided. Most of the cultic tendencies and the witchcraft tendencies actually are exhibited in the Catholic and Protestant churches.
Okay, hold your views right then.
Yes.
Let's take a look at what the president had to say with regards to the same. We have the bite now.
See how you talk nicely to these people. Show them the way. It's a big challenge. And he has analyzed the issue very well. Kubanga agambye nti enzikiriza ezikiriza mu by'amalogo akabi akalimu kali nti omuntu yejjako obuvunanyizibwa buli kisoba agamba nti waliwo amuloze.
Provision, especially on aspects of witchcraft, must be empowered. The legislation must be in there. We should have enactments within the law.
If somebody is accused of being a witch or having witchcraft, proof of it is very difficult. So the Uganda should make it almost a cultural law. It might be a different witchcraft in Buganda, also different from Lango.
So ideally, it shows that even our leaders are concerned with regards to this particular trend, and they're trying to see how do we mitigate this? What could be the ideal solution to curb this? And you mentioned a very important aspect, and of course this with the developments that we've been seeing the past few days on the government wanting to regulate, the religious institutions, and like you're saying, pretty much their eye could be on the prophetic churches. Of which, what I'm getting from you is that the two of you are against the move by government to try and regulate.
Yes.
But don't you think it's an important step, number one, now that you actually mentioned that there's some churches that actually practice witchcraft, that don't preach the real, doctrine. Don't you think that's a move to maybe save the face of some churches, maybe like yours, as you call them, to be, right churches and honest churches that preach the right doctrine, such that government wants you to save your face and let's deal with the them that are errant? Don't you think it's a right move trying to save your face as well? Why are you against it?
I think I'll
touch on witchcraft as well.
Yes, exactly, on witchcraft. First of all, any law, a criminal law at least, you have to address the mischief. What is the mischief? What is the challenge that you want to address? And what the president mentions is just a part of it. Now, let me just put things very plainly here. This was the president, the head of state, who was speaking here. Now, I have had the head of state himself at a national prayer breakfast where he has mentioned that, I think you churches are just powerless. I would rather believe in these things. I know it for a fact that actually the head of state believes in witchcraft. Number two, yes, he does.
Just a disclaimer on this one.
These are my personal views.
Yes, this is not views of NTV.
Number two, this is NTV. I don't know why even the selection of the story is about a local man. You have a trending story of a head of an arm of government, the Speaker of Parliament.
Okay, all right. Let me just jump over to Mr. Bragg in 1 second. Your last closing remarks with regards to the same touch on witchcraft and the regulations by government.
Well, I think the regulations are not any good. They are not protecting any church. I think they are misguided, misled, and misinformed, because you cannot regulate what you cannot understand.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for coming in studios. We'll continue with this conversation. Your views are honored. Like I always say, the hashtag is Morning at NTV. Thank you so much, Mr. Simon Senyonga, a Christian lawyer, and also he's actually a remnant. I'm sure you've noticed. And also Mr. Brian Kagezi, a born-again preacher at Numa Church. I got that right. Just a disclaimer, those views are solely theirs and not a representation of what NTV stands by. Morning at NTV still continues. Up next is reality on the ground with David Rukasi. Stay.
Watching Morning at NTV.
Love is in the air, everywhere I look around. Love is in the air, every sight, every sound.